If you listen closely to oral histories from the 1930s, especially those recorded in rural America after the Depression had passed, you hear references to food and tools being hidden where the ground stays cold and wet. These were not cellars, not wells, and not root houses in the traditional sense. They were improvised storage spaces carved into the landscape itself, using groundwater as a stabilizing force rather than something to be avoided. The water hollow trick was born from scarcity, refined by necessity, and quietly passed from neighbour to neighbour when money, materials and trust were all in short supply. Why storage became a survival problem during the Depression is easy to understand. Electricity was rare in rural areas. Ice deliveries were unreliable. Food spoiled quickly, and theft was a real concern. Families needed places that stayed cool, resisted rodents, and could not be easily discovered. Digging deep cellars was labour-intensive and often impossible in rocky or flood-prone ground. What people did instead was exploit places where water already shaped the earth. The water hollow was typically built at the edge of a spring seep, seasonal creek bank, or low spot where groundwater surfaced just below the soil. The key was not standing water, but slow, constant moisture. This moisture stabilized temperature year-round, keeping the hollow cool in summer and above freezing in winter. Depression-era families learned that if you worked with that water instead of fighting it, you could create storage that required no fuel, no machinery, and almost no maintenance. Construction began with careful site choice. The hollow was dug horizontally into a bank or slope rather than straight down. This prevented collapse and allowed water to drain naturally away from stored goods. The cavity was shallow but wide, often no more than 3 to 4 feet deep. Digging stopped as soon as damp, cool soil was reached. Going deeper was unnecessary and risky. The walls were then stabilized using flat stones, scrap lumber, or packed clay. Nothing fancy was required, really. The goal was structural stability and airflow control, not dryness. A simple stone lining allowed moisture to equalize without pooling, you see. In some cases, hollow logs or repurposed barrels were set into the cavity to form a removable storage chamber, making it easier to clean and rotate supplies. The most important feature was the water buffer itself. Damp earth absorbs heat slowly and releases it slowly. Now, this thermal mass kept temperatures steady even during heat waves. Food stored in sealed containers inside the hollow stayed cool far longer than anything kept above ground. Root vegetables, preserved meats, canned goods, and even dairy were stored this way when other options failed. Access was deliberately inconvenient. Hollows were concealed behind brush, false rock faces, or removable sod plugs. Some families used hinge boards weighted with soil to disguise openings completely. This reduced theft and kept animals out, you know. During hard times, invisibility was as valuable as refrigeration. So, applying this knowledge today, well, it really means respecting the same principles rather than just copying the exact form. The first step is to identify a spot on your land where moisture stays pretty consistent, but you don't want it to be flooding, of course. This could be, say, a shaded slope, or maybe the downhill side of your garden, or even near a drainage path that manages to stay cool, even in the heat of summer. The second step, then, is all about horizontal digging instead of vertical excavation. You see, a shallow, sideways cavity actually minimizes the risk of collapse and helps you stay within that stable temperature zone underground. These days, modern builders can reinforce the walls with stone, concrete blocks, or even rot-resistant wood. But it's important the structure remains breathable. Containers really do matter. Back in the day, Depression-era families learned pretty quickly that storage failed when food touched the soil directly. So you want to use sealed jars, metal tins, or any food-safe containers you can get your hands on. Place them on wooden slats or stones so there's air circulation underneath. And remember, the hollow should smell like earth, not rot. Drainage control is critical. You know, even a slight downward slope toward the entrance prevents water accumulation. If necessary, a shallow trench outside the opening can divert runoff during heavy rain. The goal here is damp stability, not saturation. So, rotation and inspection completed the system, right? Food was checked regularly, not just left and forgotten. The hollow became part of daily life, not just some emergency stash. That habit, honestly, is what made the system reliable over time. What really made the water hollow trick effective was that it used the landscape itself as infrastructure. No money changed hands and, well, no technology had to be purchased. The earth itself just became the storage system. That's why the method, you know, spread quietly during the Depression. It worked for folks who had nothing else to rely on. The technique faded after electrification and refrigeration became widespread, I suppose. Like many Depression-era practices, it was abandoned not because it failed, but because convenience replaced necessity. Yet the physics behind it never changed. Moist soil still stabilizes temperature. Horizontal storage still resists collapse. And concealment, well, it still matters when resources are limited. For Backyard Wisdom viewers, the water hollow isn't about returning to hardship. It's about understanding how previous generations solved real problems with observation and discipline, rather than just equipment. It's a reminder that storage isn't just about containers, but about the environment itself. If you value practical history that still applies today, Backyard Wisdom is where these stories live. Go on and subscribe to keep learning techniques shaped by hard times and sharp minds. And share this episode with anyone who thinks old knowledge no longer earns its keep.